Welcome to MoobTube. Here with Ralph Pritchard, as ever. Today we are talking about, or we are in theory continuing a conversation. A few moments ago, we finished talking about Charlotte Wells and a film that has "Sun" in the title. We are now talking about an entirely different Wells. So put your past thoughts behind you as we try and discuss as deeply as possible within the limited time available to us about a filmmaker whose influence is gigantic, whose output even under extremely constrained conditions is extraordinary, and wide and deep. Who,
as is his gut,
as
later in life.
Was his gut, his ever accelerating gut, which was actually foretold in both the it was foretold in
numerous
The
films.
Stranger, actually, because in The Stranger there's a great moment where his students rib him and go, you should really join us for a run because you're really packing on the pounds.
Oh, really?
And lo and behold, 10 years later, Orson Welles became very round, but I think
almost every film up to him being fat, he plays a character with a fat suit. Even in Citizen Kane, he has to.
This is true. He has to bulk out. But it was always magnetic and a very handsome man. But I think that's kind of actually talking about the kind of the waistline or the gut of Orson Welles. Is one of the interesting things about him is that he was a larger than life character, kind of very rare, kind of I suppose public intellectual, a strange kind of archaic throwback in a way, even in his own time, despite being one of the great cinematic innovators. But he's also a figure who's, I suppose, their public representation and their public perception and projection kind of often swallows their filmmaking. Everyone knows Orson Welles by look and voice and gesture, and he's been infinitely copied in everything from the Looney Tunes and Animaniacs to Pinky and the Brain to The Simpsons. He's kind of everywhere.
He pioneered a cinematic language.
Yeah.
He, like the directors we were talking about in the 30s, he used many bold techniques, some of which remain bold and unique in their moment, and some of which have become part of like how those stories are told. Yeah.
What's your journey with Orson Welles?
Well, of course, when I was very young, I watched Citizen Kane because I was told it was the greatest film of all time.
It might well be.
Which no, I don't think it is.
Okay. Well, one of them.
I actually think it sounds like an edgelord take. I actually think it's one of his weakest films because it gets kind of once you've seen it a few times, it actually, the structure of it seems a bit obvious, like the way that it starts with this kind of newsreel, like this is the man, according to his biography, but who is the man?
Who is the real man?
Who's the real man? And then that Rosebud is meant to, uncover these sort of deep, after Sun, the idea that the childhood will enlighten the adulthood,
There's a key that can be used to unlock a life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of a bit facile and a bit cliche and whatever. It's kind of moving, but a lot of the film, actually, people forget, is spent focusing on how he desperately wanted his second wife. He desperately wanted her to be. She was like a strip club singer, and he desperately wanted her to be a high class singer to sort of protect his own pride. And so he forced her to have all these lessons to sing well, but she couldn't sing well.
I feel like as an invert, it's like almost like an inverse of the Blue Angel by von Sternberg.
I haven't seen that actually. So
great film. About a senatorial public figure who's brought low by a hooer, by
lust,
stripper, by lust.
By his own lust.
But I think, for me, Citizen Kane, obviously, Touch of Evil was my second Wells film. Like I was saying to you earlier in our group chat, it was I think one of the first DVDs I bought as an adult, from like HMV when it was still like a going concern. And I think I watched that maybe something else, and then years elapsed. And it's only been in the last maybe 12 months that I started rewatching.
Well, we did a podcast mostly about the trial, but we also looked at The Other Side of the Wind, which is this Netflix restored, unfinished film that he did. Yeah, it was quite exciting and experimental.
Accompanied by the kind of the documentary.
The two are hard to distinguish.
They'll Love Me When I'm Dead.
Yeah, because it's sort of made. So So as I was saying in the Charlotte Wells podcast, check it out. We were scathing review of After Sun. One of the main problems with British cinema, not that Orson Welles is British, but it's an interesting example. One of the main problems with British cinema is that we are afraid to create bold images, to create spectacle, to make really striking parades that you see in Fellini, or kind of Hollywood.
Not enough clowns.
Massive kind of Hollywood vistas. Or like what Tarkovsky achieves in his films.
The sublime.
The sublime spectacle. For some reason, the layered sublime spectacle, depth, is a crucial element on a technical level, because many shots in British films are more about texture than depth. They're more sort of flat images, shallow depth of field. They kind of just focus and they just rely on close-ups. There's a very interesting story about A Lady from Shanghai by Orson Welles, where the star of the film, Rita Hayworth, who was
remember her,
was his wife just prior to the production of this film. The production company really wanted just loads of close-ups of her, basically. And the final edit is a very weird compromise between what Welles wanted and what the studio wanted. It includes all of Welles's insane spectacles, like the House of Mirrors scene, the scene in the aquarium. But it also contains these very banal close-ups of Rita Hayworth that were basically kind of there to fulfill like
the studio's expectations.
The studio's expectation. This is our star, exactly.
Yeah.
And they wanted that of the woman more than of Orson.
They wanted a show reel.
Exactly, so this is very banal and annoying for people who love great cinema, and it's that flatness that makes films sort of homogenous. Not that some directors like Bergman are able to create the really striking close up, but what Welles did that not many directors do now is real true depth. A shot where there are things seemingly miles apart, they're all in focus, and they're all kind of.
So just to give an example, I don't know if I rewatched Touch of Evil this afternoon or this morning when I woke up, and there's this is literally one of the last examples I can think of, but there's an amazing scene where Orson Welles is the sclerotic detective who's just been uncovered. He's been revealed that he's been planting evidence for years. He's actually rotten to the core. It's one of these bad apples we keep hearing about. And he is crossing the bridge with his detective who's wired up, mic'd up. And it must be one of the first filmic uses of a convention that's now become the norm, the
like
wire.
Bluetooth or something.
So they're crossing this bridge, and because it is Orson Welles, he's got this crane shot, this high angle looking down, and they're crossing the bridge. Meanwhile, the other thing that a lazy filmmaker would do is that we've got Charlton Heston with his the actual listening device, right? So he's listening in on this, and he's got to follow because the radio range isn't very long. Now, rather than cutting between Charlton Heston under the bridge and them on top of the bridge, which he does for a bit, we actually get them walking in the foreground, and in the background, in the top quarter of the screen, we see Charlton Heston actually crossing out. It's
lit extremely well. You see the reflections in the water when he's stamping through he's literally stamping through the shallow water to get closer. And of course, crucially, the dramatic irony reveals itself with the echo from Charlton Heston's recording device, which is playing back the feedback, echoing under the arch. As soon as he's under the arch, this creates an echo, which means that Welles's character
is aware he's being bugged.
Hank Quinlan is his name.
Hank Quinlan. And it's that's an amazing use of depth. It's an amazing use of space and the three-dimensionality, actual three-dimensionality of space that we all experience on a daily basis. And I think that is a great example of where Welles uses depth. It's a great where he uses angles. So Welles perfected, in a way that obviously he was heavily influenced by Europeans pre-World War II German cinema in particular, expressionist cinema, Pabst, Bernard, Lang, whatever. Obviously a lot of directors who would then subsequently go and work in Hollywood.
The great Hollywood film was so often made by European immigrants.
It was Operation Paperclip, avant la lettre. But the use of these kind of angles.
What's Operation Paperclip?
Operation Paperclip was it's now becoming a conspiracy. It's not conspiracy. Post World War II, Operation Paperclip was the bringing of Nazi scientists, rocket scientists, to the US to work on the space program.
Okay, great.
But what we had was
a new thing every day.
Was what they kind of walked with. In a way, Orson Welles ran with, which was these use of these very expressionistic angles, which are lit in high contrast, We see it in Falstaff, Chimes at Midnight, with the framing of, say, Hal, the Prince King, from a low angle when he's king holding his scepter and dressed in his new crown. We see it in all of his films. We see it in The Stranger looking up into the bell tower. We see it in Citizen Kane. We see it in The Magnificent Ambersons to an extent. And I think there's
huge depth in The Magnificent Ambersons. I actually, I thought the composition in Magnificent Ambersons was magnificent.
Another film that's was butchered by the studio RK. No, RK.
Yeah. I mean, every Welles film has with it a really frustrating story about the battle between Welles and the studio. And for whatever reason, there are some interesting anecdotes about Welles, about how he was difficult to cooperate with, about this like Kanye-like kind of...
This isn't unbelievable.
Belief he
part
had
of his
in himself.
magic.
No, absolutely. Yeah. But also, he was strangely generous. I mean, there's a great story about the opening of Touch of Evil, this very famous 2-minute long shot that they had to film 7 times. It obviously starts with a guy lighting a bomb and putting it on the back of a car, and then Welles's character and a lady drive around in this car, and various people...
It's not Welles' character.
Hank Queenland's in the car.
No, he's not.
Yeah, he is. Then he gets out.
He gets out. Of course he does. Sorry, but the guy that is killed is someone else. It's another man.
Yeah. Anyway, so this long shot. Let's not get waylaid by fact checkers. We're not. This is not.
No, we don't
this is
need
not.
to.
We're about ecstatic truth. Not.
If you want to leave a
natural
comment
truth.
in the thing, don't. Because I will delete it.
Do leave. We love comments actually on YouTube. Positive or negative, it's hilarious every time. But it's good to know we're making an impact in some way. So in this shot, there was a customs guy who do you know this story?
Yeah.
There's a customs guy that has like one line, and if it's at 6, they shot it 7 times. About 6 times they did it. This customs guy fucked up the line. Everything else in the take had gone basically fine. Yeah. But this customs guy fucked up his line. I don't know why they cared particularly, because there's so many bits in all of Welles' films where people
a bit rough around the
people
edges.
say lines and people's mouths move and nothing comes out, or vice versa. But yeah, he fucks up his line. In the end, Welles sort of says to the guy, "Look, can you just mouth a bit and we'll fill it in later? Like, just don't worry about what you're saying." And obviously, it works fine. And someone apparently asked him afterwards, why don't you just get rid of him, get another guy? This is a huge film set full of like extras, and you could have probably found someone, tried someone else out. And Welles said, "Oh, but that would have destroyed him." It's like really amazing, like level of
generosity,
generosity and like perfectionism, not just about the final product, but about the people who work with. Not that I'm being discoursey about how people treat who they work with, but it's just kind of interesting that his relationship with colleagues had this like real, there's so much stuff he cared a lot about that other people weren't really looking out for, and I think that probably led to him losing creative control on some of the big calls, and why almost every famous Welles film has this kind of storied struggle
against production, against the nabobs in the production offices who are seen as being these philistine enemies of art, which is true, probably.
But I think some directors had a really good way of surviving that.
More diplomatic, maybe.
There are films that were made against the grain in that era that didn't seem to.
For sure.
I think managed to assert their vision.
I mean, Welles also struggled with his political reputation as well. He was outspoken politically. He was involved. He was caught up in various, the OG cancellations of McCarthy. He was considered to be a red. He was considered to be politically untrustworthy. And I think there's, certain films that you can see which are attempted by him to kind of create a sop to that reputation. The Stranger.
Well, he had to go to Europe, didn't he?
He had to go to Europe eventually after Touch of Evil, 1958. He went
to Europe twice, I think.
Yeah. But even with like The Stranger, which is his 1946 film, it was made after The Magnificent Ambersons, which was 1942. And he came under a lot of suspicion. And I think he made this film, which was really about, sort of German infiltration in America after the war. And it's kind of like in a way a Welles B-side. It's a great thriller though. Really chips along at a great pace. It's an excellent film, but it does feel like a kind of political sop to, it's kind of a slightly paranoid story of subversion in the American heartland of this imagined kind of Midwest community, which was exactly the one. And I think he was torn between these desires to work. He wanted to work, and he wanted to work on a big scale. And the only way he could do that, not being of means himself, was to work within the studio system. Before he kind of despaired and left for Europe and started making, Shakespearean adaptations in Spain, which was a great thing for his career, I think. But I think where he wanted to be was in America. That it's where he wanted to be accepted. I think there were many times where he escaped into the arms of the theatre, where he always had a lot more latitude, and made his actual reputation in theatre,
in radio originally.
And radio, obviously War of the Worlds. But his reputation in theatre is much. The boat was rocked much less. So he actually did, before he did Macbeth in the when was Macbeth?
50s.
50s? Yeah. Okay, so before he did Macbeth, in 36 he did Macbeth in Harlem.
Oh yes, with an all black cast.
Yeah, the what's called the voodoo Macbeth, basically. Which was an outrageous success, of all these things he did. It sold out completely. It was, a complete barnstorm of a film in a way that, a lot of his work of theatre, in a way a lot of his films have slowly, at the time they performed badly in cinemas, and have only subsequently gained kind of a critical momentum. But at the time, his theatre would always pack the house out. So I think that was a safe place for him to go to. And if only he had the latitude and success and kind of like engaged audience that he had in theatre. This is one of the few times I'll pump up the theatre, by the way.
Yeah, well, because it was a space. I mean, I sometimes say that directors who started off in theatre are less qualified than directors who've never directed before, because I do think it does teach you certain habits. But I'll make an exception for Welles because he had such a strong sense of as I say, spectacle. But yes, I think the time has come to talk about. Not just Welles' relationship to Shakespeare, but also Welles' relationship to Kafka, and the trial. These were made around the same time. Well, trial that slightly later, it was early 60s. But these films. So obviously, from the theatre, Welles had a pre-existing relationship with Shakespeare. He'd adapted Shakespeare many times. He talks in filming Othello about like the honour of sort of. How humble he feels. He's not known for his humility, but how humbled he was to be working with the source material of the Bard. Your Bard, mate. And yeah, it's weird because there are certain things. The best example that comes to mind at the moment is Macbeth. The killing of King Duncan happens off screen. Yeah. We sort of stare at the set basically while. And Lady Macbeth,
and it is
down the
set.
stairs, and it is a set,
very much. Set,
and Macbeth goes up and does it, and comes back and says that this is done.
The deed is done.
The deed is done, and this is a problem for cinema. This is not cinematic. We should see this thing.
It is one of his weakest films, and I think
and yet there are these moments. The opening texture, the textures of the opening of Macbeth, are
when the
very
witches
good.
are mixing this foul broth, and it looks almost like a kind of avant-garde film from the same era. This kind of slop of textures,
but similar to
incredibly Braccagian, like
exactly similar to Magnificent Ambersons. There's this kind of sort of montage of industry towards the end. Apparently, there were other films where he, like Lady Frankenstein, apparently where he had plans to show much more of this kind of experiment, almost like Chick Strand or Brackage, as you say, kind of montage of things. It was very exciting, and yet, he couldn't kind of do more of it, but. But it is a weird, I suppose, the way in the Macbeth you are watching a play with these kind of intensely cinematic interludes, but ultimately he wants to be faithful to the letter, to the words of Shakespeare, and that's one of the great things about doing. It's a textual adaptation, not a textual adaptation. An advantage of that is you get to hear a Shakespeare play, which is a very beautiful thing. He does
extemporize a bit. He does. I think that's more obvious in maybe Falstaff in Chimes at Midnight, where he combines or collapses Henry IV and Henry V together. Yeah,
but the language is all Shakespearean language.
The language is all Shakespearean, yes. So, but he does kind of beg, borrow. He kind of mushes them together.
And Falstaff is a more cinematic endeavour.
Yeah, I think he was constrained with Macbeth by budget. So he had a very limited budget. They had to borrow costumes from all sorts of other productions that weren't even remotely medieval. The set, like you said, is very much a set. It looks like a stage play at times, but because he's not filming it flat on, straight on compositionally, he's still using. He really makes use of his eye for high and low angle shots in that, because he's like, it's the only way he can activate this set is to shoot it in interesting angles and to make, obviously Macbeth is a tortured, malignant, troubled figure. So what better than to shoot him at these kind of insane, sharp angles with his face half in shadow. Did
you see the Joel Cohen Tragedy of Macbeth film recently?
No, I haven't seen it. No,
I haven't either. But I've seen the trailer. But it was quite interesting that film seemed to have a very similar like set.
That's interesting.
It was like black and white, and it had this. It was filmed not. I don't know if this was a budget thing. I think it was an A24 film.
It was an A24 film. I saw it. I wonder if that was a reference for it, thinking about it now.
Because it was just so set, even though it was like probably CGI'd a lot of it. It had quite a minimalist kind of stark.
It was very milky.
Milky, exactly. It was reminiscent of Macbeth's stage.
I mean, it goes to show his influence. I mean, I think with Falstaff, the actual battle scene. So this is the battle against the Northumbrians and against Harry Hotspur. Is shot. It's one of the most exciting.
Yeah, it's Kurosawa-esque in its
100%. And it's so, or even like Spielberg, how Spielberg might shoot a war scene. It's like, it feels like a reference manual for how to shoot the hot. Until that point, something like medieval warfare was glamorized as knights dueling in a field. But here it's literally people crawling through mud and filth.
Beautiful to watch.
Incredibly beautiful. And also very funny because, you've also got the whole time Wells as Falstaff, this big fat oaf of a knight kind of running from bush to bush, looking out behind trees. And it's so incredibly funny.
He's a great comic character. I mean, Falstaff just feels like he was created for Wells.
He said, he actually said that Falstaff was Shakespeare's greatest creation. I think probably because he saw maybe a lot of himself, this boastful, kind of slightly decadent but really principled knight who's misunderstood and harried from all corners by people who think he's a bad influence, or that he's over the hill.
Indeed. Well, he's not managed to make it up to the top of the hill because of his
because of his big fat guy. Yeah. But you mentioned. So we talked about Magnificent Ambersons. We watched Magnificent Ambersons collectively at Christmas, didn't we?
Yeah. That was when this Wellesian expedition sort of began for us, I think.
Because I mean, it's
on the BBC iPlayer, by the way, for listeners in the UK.
Yeah, actually, do check it out. And it uses some. It kind of extends some of the things that he kind of did in Citizen Kane, like the kind of newsreel footage. There's a bit of newsiness in this, but I think he makes it his own. I think one of the really interesting things about Magnificent Ambersons, as we were pointing out, it manages to deploy several different visual registers as the film evolves. And the beginning is shot in this kind of vignetted. It harks back to an older style of filmmaking.
He loves a montage where he just tells you all these things in quick succession, which is quite radio-ish actually. Radio plays often rely on a huge amount of like exposition, fast-paced exposition, that whether it be radio fiction or radio documentary. Sort of like setting the scene very vividly, very quickly. Which happens in Citizen Kane and in Ambersons.
Yeah, I mean, even formally and visually, it looks like an older film. The kind of like the vignette. The vignette. You've got this slightly daguerreotype blush to the scenes. You've got this very flat and these use of these painted backgrounds, and then as the Ambersons unravel with the arrival of the motor car and the failings of the family, you get the formally kind of very. It's shot like a kind of Lubitsch scene. You've got these this kind of shimmering grisaille, basically of grey of these party scenes. Later, these big, deep, thick expressionist shadows shatter the space of the Ambersons' house. So he's so confident in deploying all these different visual languages. He doesn't go, okay, I'm just going to shoot it in one way. I'm going to tell a story through blocking and form and shadow and light. And that's why Wells is such a great visual innovator. And it's but isn't necessarily remembered as such. It's weird.
Mm.
You don't have that image in your head until you watch a lot of Wells back to back and think critically about it.
Yeah, and that probably leads us on quite nicely to the trial, because the trial is maybe his most visually astonishing film. Do we think that? I think it's pretty much.
Yeah, I think
he manages to combine some of Macbeth's like mise-en-scène flourishes with something like a bit more like actually feels like it's real and not a set. And it's a genuinely like full-blooded literary adaptation. He's obviously read Kafka's The Trial. He's obviously picked up from it various kind of affects to do with alienation and fear and anger.
Yeah, about size with it.
Exactly.
Scale is a big thing, in the trial. I mean, it's I'm trying to I think the last time I saw it was when we just briefly before we did this our podcast on it.
We did a podcast on the trial.
Have you rewatched it?
I rewatched it last week. Yeah. It's actually kind of hard work because it's so long and it's just one long anxiety. It's one long. It's really gets under your skin because it's so frustrating. What the guy's going through is so frustrating and seemingly like pointless, and that's obviously the point of it all.
Yeah.
And the point of what Kafka was trying to capture. And it's a really beautiful. What I think is great, and it's so unexpected that he would adapt Kafka, because I think we generally think of Kafka's dramas as happening on quite a sort of on a small internal scale.
Also a very, very European.
Yeah, and very
in
European
the mold of
mind,
a European existentialism, which everything before Wells had been so American.
Yeah.
Or so Shakespearean.
Exactly.
It's an unusual text for him to adapt, perhaps, to go from Othello or Falstaff or Henry V to Kafka.
Yeah, and I think because Shakespeare is obviously about large battles and kings,
courtly
and
intrigue.
Whereas this is about the mind. This is really about your own brain, your own like. More than other Kafka. Well, I suppose Metamorphosis as well. All Kafka's films are all like they're about institutions, but they're also about
neuroses.
Yeah. And I was just very struck by.
It's a perfect adaptation.
It's a very distinct adaptation.
I think, like I said, even his use of scale, is great when he's actually goes to his hearing at the court. There's this enormous great door that he's dwarfed by.
Unafraid to be obvious. That would be my main compliment to Wells.
Yes,
utterly unafraid of being obvious, and I think I take that as I've probably said this many times on the pod. That's a huge praise from me.
Yeah, because he was being obvious in an artful and interesting way.
Yeah.
It's like I think. Again, I'm trying to kind of sift my memory for the effect the film had, and it's one of those cases of where Wells has been very influential, because you can see Terry Gilliam doing like Brazil, which is a fugly postmodern, rereading of not 1984, which is kind of its professed source text, but actually Wells' The Trial. I think in terms of like even this very chaotic scene in the apartment at the beginning where he's arrested, as it were, or he's come to be arrested and doesn't know why. And it's greatly darkly comedic. It's very disorienting. The apartment's very hard to figure out because the door seems to give on to various different places.
That's like a very funny thing that you sort of accept early on, and then you sort of don't know why you accept it, because it's so odd to live in a flat with a. Like I guess
bedroom opens onto like the corridor outside, but then there's a bathroom further on.
Yeah, and then there's this other door that just leads onto this flat that this prostitute is renting out. Played by Jean Moreau very well. But it's and always he's accused, but all these women are throwing themselves at him, and he's in this kind of strange. I mean, it really is like a dream. It's like a man's dream. It's a dream I've had many times.
Every guy wants to really be Kay in the castle or in the trial. I mean, again, it's like, if to be a bit pat about it, you could say, it's kind of in a way the obvious text for Wells to adapt as well. A man who's harried and persecuted, who is fighting a kind of oppression in a way. like a creative oppression.
Yeah, and I think
the impression of imagination.
It sort of achieves what Citizen Kane doesn't achieve. I wouldn't necessarily assume it's what Citizen Kane wanted to achieve, but definitely what Citizen Kane lacks, even beyond the kind of newsreel opening. It lacks an inner life, really. We still only ever see Charles Foster Kane's kind of fears and desires through how they impact other people. Which is all fine, lots of that. I mean, Citizen Kane is a fantastic movie. I didn't mean, I didn't mean to do it down earlier, but clearly there's this kind of dynamic in the trial that really penetrates like what it is to kind of like not be sure of yourself, which is like a really like a genuinely universal feeling. We're not all kind of to be ostracized as well. And I think obviously with something like Kane, and one of the reasons probably for Kane's ascendancy is partly from consensus building. Everyone says it's the best film ever made, so everyone continues to look at that as the best Welles film. But I think also it's the American narrative, because it's really like George Hearst, isn't it? It's telling the story of a real American Randolph Hearst, sorry, the real American William Randolph Hearst, sorry, the real kind of newspaper baron, the real figure. And there are other source references for well, now it's Murdoch.
For Kane. Now it's Murdoch, but I think it tells, it's a great Succession-esque story that talks about kind of conceit and hubris and power and greed, and obviously it's a very eternal story for America.
Yeah, and it's Trump's favorite film and all this,
which is amazing. I'd love to watch Citizen Kane with Trump.
Yeah, that'd be great fun.
Rosebud,
it's very important. It's very sad. Yeah, and of course it's sort of like every portrait, every tragic portrait of success is also. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, that I think, because every tragic portrait of success is also glamorizing, because everyone is trying to somehow get at some kind of truth that within this, like everyone, like when Drake's music is, or many of these rappers who sing about their success being tragic, there's the aspiration to become king of the world and then finally discover their unhappiness in its purest form, because of how happy they should be. Despite all this, they're still not happy, and then we see that unhappiness.
Head that wears a crown,
exactly.
To talk Shakespeare again.
And it is Shakespeare, and then all these, whether it be Triangle of Sadness or White Lotus, which I haven't seen, but all the Succession, all these things, it will, for better or worse, in a society with power imbalances, which may be, forever the society we live in, the intrigue of a kind of a seat of power in a state of insecurity will never evaporate.
Yeah, but I think even with a film like Touch of Evil, which explicitly is a narrative about corruption and principles, even a character like Captain Quinlan is very sympathetic to us, because he has lost his wife in tragic circumstances, whose motivations who is a tragic figure. He's a tragic he's an anti-hero in a very classic sense, and his it's rare for Welles to really paint a villain in a black and white, completely transparent way. I mean, again, nobody, Macbeth is obviously an anti-hero, but Macbeth is a very compelling figure. Even Lady Macbeth is a compelling figure.
Know what he's doing.
Yeah. He doesn't know what he's doing.
But also I think Welles, because he plays all these anti-heroes.
He's great.
He's just so lovable.
He's so lovable, because
and that's not just like a personal trait of him. That's like, he always manages to infuse these anti-heroes with something kind of irresistible.
I think so, and it's like, I mean, obviously, like, again, Touch of Evil is freshest in my mind, and I would say, the Vargas, the this sort of like the good cop in his film,
played by Charlton Heston in Mech's Face. I don't know.
Mech's Face. He's in Bronze Face.
He's like tinted a bit, his skin.
But I think here, if anything, he is a figure who, whilst wins out, he is a quite unsympathetic character in a lot of ways. He spends the whole film, his wife is being harassed, attempted raped, drugs, attacked by gangsters, by Mexican gangsters.
Yeah, that's
and
almost
he's
like
so indifferent to
that's
her.
almost a structural film. Yeah, he doesn't try very hard to
save her, because it's alluded to very aggressively to him lots of times. Like, oh, you left your wife in that motel. And he's like, why should I be worried? And earlier, someone aside, the conversation isn't finished, where someone says to him, you know who owns that hotel? And it's Grande, the mob boss. So he knows two things. Two people have said to him that his wife should not be left alone in that motel. What does he do? He goes down into the city archives to pursue his case against Quinlan, to prove Quinlan's
He's more interested in his own tale, isn't he?
Absolutely. And it's great where you end up feeling like this man who's got this absolute smoke show of a wife lounging around this motel waiting to, like, you know, fuck him on their honeymoon, is actually just like, no, I must go into the archives for 5 hours to ruin this man who's actually, turns out, is actually right in the end. He was right about the man who'd planted the TNT in the car. It's an amazing bit of kind of a trompe-l'oeil in a way. It's like this amazing piece of inversion where you end up rooting ultimately for the most complicated of his characters, which invariably is often Orson Welles himself.
Yeah, and that makes the more distinctive moral tale the one where you feel identification that goes against perhaps your initial instinct about, you know, where your loyalties lie. What more can one say about Wells?
Have we hit the bottom of the well? I don't think we ever can. Yeah. But like,
there's always more films to watch and more. I haven't seen Mr. Ockerton or The Stranger. You have seen The Stranger.
I've seen The Stranger.
There's another one with Jean Moreau that I haven't seen because no one's ever talked about it.
There's another medieval. There's also obviously Don Quixote, which was an unfinished film. It was assembled after his death.
There's Too Much Johnson, which was unfinished, which was reconstructed recently. There's all the films that he was in, like The Third Man, that have somehow kind of gained his energy in beyond the performance. Yeah. I feel like the sort of scene in the underground.
They become Wells films.
Under Vienna, the scenes in The Third Man very much have that quality. He was a totemic figure who was, like so many kind of wunderkind geniuses, misunderstood or distrusted for his level of self-confidence. So it's something to be wary of. You know, it's happening with Kanye as well. This cynicism.
History repeats itself.
This cynicism around people who happen to be both talented and
disturbed slightly,
but also aware that they are very, very talented. You know.
Well,
when megalomania is like on some level justified. You know.
Yeah, when you have a genius. I mean. There's no getting around. I think obviously the circumstances of Wells' own life, you know, his self-mythologization. You know, he came from a relatively normal family. Yeah. In you know, sort of, he struggled a lot as a child. His father died very young. He had to bring up his sister. You know, he's got kind of like he did not come from the impression he gives, which is this very senatorial kind of transatlantic aristocracy, which is the impression he gave. Like, he was out to prove something his entire life, which was a constructed image of himself. You know, when he first started out, he went to Ireland, which is funny. So is
that where he got the terrible Irish accent from Lady from Shanghai?
It is bad. But I think when he went he went to Ireland as a young man to act. And so he went. Why Ireland? I don't know. I think he had some, in theory, kind of family roots.
He was
there.
Dublin down.
And he went out there.
He was an absolute corker.
Keep going. I have none. He went out there. He goes up there. He goes to like a small, tiny regional theatre, and he wants to act in something. And he's like, I can't make my name right away in America, so I'm going to make my name in Europe. I'm going to start in Ireland. Goes to this theatre. They're like,
Big Fish, Small Pond.
Big Fish, Small Pond. He's like, I'd like to act in your next play. And they're like, well, where are you acting? He's like, I'm a huge star in America. Like, I've done loads.
So he faked it and he made it.
He faked it and he made it. And they're like, oh, sure, okay, fine. We have no reason to not believe you. So from the very first, he had this sense of convivial truth making. I think about him. Calling it lying is incorrect. I think it was just this auto mythologizing that he was able to kind of project from himself, and it touches all of his films.
They didn't have fucking internet. They couldn't verify.
They couldn't look at his IMDb profile.
Nowadays, that shit would just fall apart immediately. It's a sad case. Yeah.
I'm kind. It's difficult with Wells because is there a Wells visual style? Yes, I think we've kind of chalked it out to an extent,
Totally.
which is his use of depth, it's his use of space, it's his use of angles. It's a very expressionistic thing which kind of stays with him. But there's also something kind of intangible about all Wells films, which is probably partly stems maybe from his performance if he's in the film. But there's a great like joy with them. Even his darkest tragedies are still.
And the themes are Shakespearean, or they are bold themes about power, about the individual relating to power, trying to make their way through it. I mean, that sets you up in America. That sets you up to be a kind of heroic director, because you're dealing with the material of American society. But yeah, I mean, for me, that he'll always go down as a great innovator in form, and it's just always worth remembering. Filmmakers need to just watch the final scene in Lady from Shanghai, and understand, like, if your film doesn't have like several scenes with like the boldness of the shootout in the House of Mirrors, whatever it is, the Fun House. If your film isn't kind of creating these new images, that really, these devices, it doesn't matter if it seems a bit contrived that they're in this particular place. This is what cinema is for. Cinema is there to deliver like extraordinary spectacle. If you're not doing that, if you're just doing a little kind of, intimate portrait of some people in a place with loads of shadows at the field, what the hell are you doing? Yeah. This is what cinema's for. So learn from it.
Too much portrait of a lady on, I don't know, antidepressants. Not enough.
Not enough. Things on fire.
Things on fire. I mean, this is it. I mean, because it's like that grandiosity, and it's not like, Wells was ever operating with phenomenal budgets. If he can do it with sets made out of paper mache, and if he can do it with a dirty bridge on a border town in Mexico, you can get this sense. I think it's
can do it. Yeah, it's not about. I mean, he did have great budgets in some cases, but that kind of spectacle can be achieved in a small room.
Small means.
It's just about making sure you remember to tell what you're telling, like with energy and vitality in a distinctive way. Otherwise, you're just doing naturalism, and the world doesn't need more naturalism.
Well, you're just doing stories, or you're doing feelings, or you're doing what you might call vibes. And I think a film like we talked about After Sun, and I think a film like After Sun it achieved its effect, and its effect is the kind of fulsome praise that's being heaped on it by people going, I watched this film and I felt it was very moving, it's very sad. Okay, but evoking a feeling isn't enough. That's only really operating on one sense. It's like trying to navigate the world. No shade to anyone that is without all five senses, but it's like trying to navigate the world with just smell when you can have sight or touch, or it's film compressed just a story, and that's something that radio drama does. It's something that a novel does, or a poem does. Like, there are tools that film that are inherent to films, a visual spatial medium and a medium of time, of duration, that aren't being played with or aren't being articulated properly. And like, story's easy, there are plenty of thousands of sad stories out in the world, or joyful stories, but how do you actually tell that story visually? And I feel like a film like After Sun didn't do that. It didn't have tiny little flashes, but any Wells film is filled with countless moments where the tragic story is being refracted through this insane lens, which is Orson Welles' view of the world.
And actually, also, he skimped on other things to get that. Yeah. And he skimped on things you're not allowed to skimp on now, like the sound, audio, the dialogue syncing at all, or like very
Italian.
And I know back then there was a bit more leeway for technical fault, for things being out of focus or whatever, but he did skimp on certain things in order to create memorable images, and ultimately that's what people walk away with remembering. They don't remember that someone.
Can we also talk about him, his satirical, like his capacity for satire as well? Because I think there's a couple of amazing moments in, again, like, because I saw Touch of Evil most recently, I saw it this morning, there's some amazing treatments of like moral panic around drugs in America at the time. And like, the main thing is this motif of Mary Jane, of cannabis, right? And obviously Wells was, I don't know about his personal taste, but he was a man of vast appetites, and I can't imagine he didn't dabble in the occasional, little bit of Columbia marching powder or some, some weed. And there's an incredible bit where it's occasionally touted that these drug dealers are, this gang are dealing in marijuana. God, it's deadly, dangerous substance. And there's a character called Wayne, who's this kind of idiot, basically, who is the motel night manager. He's this very silly,
very good at characterization. Actually,
very good characterization.
The characters you get, especially in Lady from Shanghai, the lawyer there is a fucking freak.
They're amazing, but there's no reason for these characters to be like that, except it adds this panoply of freaks and weirdos. There's an amazing bit where he goes into the hotel room that his Charlton Heston's wife has been kidnapped from. He's opened the curtains, go, it stinks in here, it stinks. Obviously people are smoking cannabis, and he picks up this blunt, basically. He looks at it and his face forms into this Richter scream, and he's like, ah, and then runs out of the building. It's this amazing little, I think, satirical poke at kind of reefer madness, moral panic in America. And Wells knew moral panic better than anyone because he did War of the Worlds, which caused a moral panic, caused a literal panic. People thought aliens were invading the west coast of America. And I think his awareness of these little, there's layers to any Wells film, even when he's working with the scaffolding of like a noir or or a Shakespearean tragedy. Like there's so many little things and little nuggets going on in there of his own peccadillos and obsessions. And that's just, for me, that's the greatest one. That the screaming and dropping of the blunt is just amazing.
On that note, We've done Orson Welles the second time. This time, I think, more comprehensively.
Yeah.
We will our next podcast will either be a kind of summary of Who Shall Shen.
We should do a special on Who Shall Shen.
Although I'm sort of waiting for the new restoration of City of Sadness to come up before I delve.
Well, the resto looks fly. It looks so
absolutely
good.
Fuego. If the restoration of Millennium Mambo is meant to go by, we have plenty to be excited about.
Yeah.
The film that was hitherto only available in standard definition. So we're kind of looking at that. But also we are going to be in Berlin. This is a decision made since our last recording. We're going to Berlin. We'll be joined by our festival correspondent, our European festivals correspondent, George Beth, who joined us in Wroclaw about 6 months ago.
Maybe a rotating cast of other strays and waves.
Exactly, yeah. We do have a kind of posse. We might bring some people in. I'll definitely bring my third mic. We will be reporting on the newest releases. The films in competition have still not yet been announced. They will be announced on the 7th of February, I believe. So we have no idea really what films we'll be talking about, which is exciting. I think
we'll follow our noses as we did with Wroclaw last year, and just go. It's partly just be there and trial and error, but
it is. I think, as many people have said, the best city to be in while a film festival is happening.
Interesting.
Because the problem with Cannes like a nightmare as a place.
Yeah,
there's like only one good restaurant, and it's just always packed and horrible. Whereas Berlin is like actually a functioning city where you might know some people and it's kind of vibey, and also the festival is like a very big festival.
Yeah.
So I'm very glad we picked it. It's going to be a bit cold, but we're going to be full of energy, full of beans, and we are going to report on last year. One of our favourite films of the year, Rimini by Ulrich Seidel, premiered. So hopefully,
if we can find a Rimini,
amidst the remains,
the Ramonies,
world cinema, we will be ecstatic.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah, that's it. So if not Who Shall Shen, we will see you in Berlin.
Indeed.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Schwen.